Welcome to the first event of the Clayton State University Visiting Writers Reading Series this spring, which is sponsored by the College of Arts and Science and the Department of English. I'm Dr. Bridget Bird, the creative writing professor here, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce our first guest this semester. Patti Callahan Henry grew up as a minister's daughter, learning early how storytelling affects our lives. She grew up spending her summers on Cape Cod, where she began her love affair with the beach, ocean, tides, and nature of the coast. Moving south at 12, she found solace in books and stories. After earning her master's degree in child health, Patti worked as a clinical nurse specialist until her first child was born. She now lives with her husband and 3 children near Atlanta along the Chattahoochee River. She's really from here right now. Patti is the New York Times best-selling author of 6 novels with Penguin now, I guess. Losing the Moon, Where the River Runs, When Light Breaks, Between the Tides, The Art of Keeping Secrets, and her most recent novel, Driftwood Summer. She is hailed as a fresh new voice in Southern fiction. She has been shortlisted for the Townsend Prize for Fiction and has been nominated for the Southeastern Independent Booksellers Fiction Novel of the Year. A reviewer of Driftwood Summer says, "When I opened to the first page and started reading, I was immediately drawn into the book. I love being drawn into a book by the time I have finished the first page, and this book definitely has that effect." This is how quickly Patti's magic works on her audience. So without waiting any further, please join me to welcome Patti Callahan Henry.
Thanks, Dr. Bird. I haven't heard that review. That was sweet. That's one I didn't find on the internet. Can you hear me okay in my thing? Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here. It has been a really long time since I was in a college classroom. I'm feeling about 18 right now. This is great. I'm here to talk about whatever y'all want to talk about. I want to talk about what interests you the most, which I assume is reading and writing, or your teacher made you be here. Either way, I want to talk about what you want to talk about. So what I'm going to do is sort of introduce myself and why I do what I do, why I write, why I think writing is an amazing thing to do as a career and as even as a hobby, and why I believe reading and writing are so powerful. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, and then y'all think about some questions you want to ask, and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. My college degree is in nursing, and I was just talking to Dr. Bird and the dean of the English department, and we were talking about how much more popular creative writing is even as a major now. And when I went to college 20 years ago, I didn't even think about taking creative writing. It wasn't a major that was, I think, even offered. And so now when I go somewhere, a party, a book festival, doesn't matter where, the main question I get asked is, why do you write and how did you come to this career after you have a master's degree in nursing? I went to Auburn University and I worked as a nurse for years before I started writing as a career. And every time I get asked this question, why do you write, or why do you think writing's important, or how did you come to this as a career, I want to have this really deep philosophical answer. You know, the kind that gets quoted in your English textbooks, and I never have one. And of course, there's a million reasons writers write. There's a million, if we went around the room, every single one of you would have a different reason why you write. You know, my teacher makes me, I feel like it's from my soul, it doesn't matter. Everybody has a different answer. It could be claiming your world, self-expression, self-discovery, communication, to get an A, the love of words. There's a million reasons we write. But it wasn't until, and this sounds ridiculous, but it's true, it wasn't until I had finished my 6th novel that I finally discovered the real reason that I write, which is going to be different from the reason that you write or even the reason anybody else writes. But to kind of explain the reason I believe mostly I write is I'm going to tell you a story about myself. I had just graduated from college and I was in a car. We had just moved to Atlanta. And I was a single working girl and in a car with another girlfriend of mine. And we were driving down Peachtree Street and she was having some kind of love affair angst that we have at 21. And it all seemed so important and so dramatic. And we were talking about it and she said, I don't remember her exact words, but she was in total despair and was thinking about quitting the whole thing. And I said, well, don't you want to see what happens next? And she literally looked at me with such a look of disdain. This is one of my best friends. And she said, she shook her head and said, Patti, not everybody thinks like you. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I took it as an insult at the time, but it wasn't until 25 years later that I realized that that's actually a gift, that that's the way that I look at things, and that that's the way that I look at life, and that's probably the reason that I write. I always want to see what happens next. What happens next? I think it's not only a life worldview that I have, it's not only a reason that I write, but I think it's also a reason for a lot of hopefulness in my life. Because what is hopelessness but thinking things will never change? We feel hopeless when we feel like things will never change. But of course they change. Things always change. It might not be the way we want them to change. It might not be what we want them to change into. It might be better or worse than we imagine, but they're going to change. Something's going to happen and things are going to change. We can make them happen or they can happen to us. And I'm always eternally, optimistically, annoyingly hopeful about what will happen next. And it's not until now that I realize that's part of the reason that I write. I take these characters and I put them in these hopeless situations where it looks like there's no answer, there's no way to turn, and then I would say, well, what would happen next? And what would they do with what happens next? So that is part of the reason that I write. Now, how I came to writing is a little bit of a different story. That's a love story. A true love story. Has nothing to do with a guy. Writing for me originated in love, and I do it out of love. To me, writing is an act of love. It's an internal act of selfishly self-love. Because writing to me is something that unless it's internally driven and unless it's something that you're passionate about and moves you, and unless you're looking inward to pour the words outward, it's not a true act of vulnerable writing. So how I came to my writing is that all the things that I loved growing up and all the things that I loved as a child, good or bad, were stitched into me to sort of make me a writer, if that makes any sense. There's always a little bit of an argument about whether a writer is born or made, and I believe that our life experiences always sort of make us who we are. And the origins of this love for me, or this writing for me, are these loves. First of all, I loved reading. I don't remember learning how to read. I don't remember not reading. I don't remember not having a book in my hand. I was a total nerd, a total bookworm nerd growing up. Absolutely. I used to get in trouble for reading. Who gets in trouble for reading? Not my daughter, I can tell you that. Or my sons. You got in trouble for reading?
Yeah, because I always read when the teacher was talking. She's like, reading is good, but there's a time and a place for it, not while I'm teaching.
That I would get the same thing. I would get the exact same thing. Well, I'd already heard what she said, so it was on to my own reading now. I'm with you. I remember one time, I was very young. This is way before your time, and Nixon was resigning on television, way before your time. And my family was watching it on this little black and white TV, and I could have cared less. I think I was 10, 11 years old. And I was sitting behind my dad with a book like this, reading. And he said, "Don't think. I don't know what you're doing behind me." Like I was smoking dope. Come on, I was reading Nancy Drew, for God's sake. So that's what I got in trouble for, was reading too much. I was definitely a big bookworm. The second thing I loved growing up were libraries. Loved libraries. They were like church to me. She mentioned in my bio, yes, I grew up as a preacher's daughter. And there's some pluses to that. I don't know what they are yet, but there are, I'm told. But one of the big minuses was that you moved around a lot. And I did move around a lot. And so when I was 12 years old, God told my dad that we should move to South Florida. I grew up in Philadelphia. And we moved to South Florida, and over a 3 or 4 year period, my parents were trying to figure out where to put the church and where to live. So I went to a different school for 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade. This is not conducive to friendships in any way. So I would escape to libraries. They were sort of my sanctuary. I remember being fascinated that no matter how long I stayed in that library or how many lunch hours I hid out in there, there was no way I was ever going to read all those books in my whole lifetime. And that was fascinating to me, that there were that many books to read. How could you want to, it's like having a smorgasbord of food, or at least that's the way I felt about it. I told you I was a nerd. The third thing I loved growing up was words. I called it the love of letters. I really loved finding out the origin of words, where they came from, how to put them together. I loved finding out how changing one word in a sentence changed everything. Just one word changed everything about that sentence. And this love led me to join the Latin Club, which didn't help my popularity status very much. You have no friends and then you join the Latin Club. Woo! So, but that's how much I loved words. I loved finding out where they came from, and I still do. I still love finding out the origin of a word. You know, I'm one of those geeks that gets the word of the day on their computer, and I get the poem of the day, and I get the word of the day, and I love finding out where it came from, what its origin was. And I think you'll find too, even in your writing, when you're trying to find the just right word in your writing, to be interested in that, to look at where that word came from and what it really means. And it has more impact in your writing when you know that and when you try to discover that. The fourth thing I loved growing up is writing. Since I could hold a crayon in my hand, I have been writing books and then making the cover and then stapling them together. Thank God they got lost on one of my many moves. But I've kept a diary since I was very, very young. I'm old now, so it's a journal because I'm mature. So not a diary anymore. But like I said before, I believe that writing is at its best when it reaches inward. And for me, and this is only for me, that writing, that journal type writing helped me discover how I say things, why I say them, the way I would say them. And that's one of the ways we differentiate our writing, is in the different ways that we would say something. Because you could give every single one of y'all a story to write. I could say, today we're going to write a story about a woman whose first love returns because her son is dating his daughter. I could tell everyone, and every single one of us would write a different story. That's what my first novel, Losing the Moon, was about. But when you wrote that, it would be nothing like Losing the Moon. Because in discovering the way you would say something, or how you would say it, or the story you would tell, it would be different for each of us. And for me, that came through journal writing. So all of these loves led to sort of the backward way that I see life, which is that I think that most people, when they're looking at an experience or reading a book, most people, when they're reading a book, they see that book through their life experience. Like you're reading a book and you go, oh, that happened to me. Or that's the way I felt. Or, oh, I know so-and-so went through that. It's almost opposite for me, a little upside down or inside out, in that I experience life through the books I read. Something will happen in life and I'll think, wow, that's just like XYZ that happened in that book that impacted me so much. So, and that's not a prerequisite by any means for being a writer. I think that's what happened to me. In all those things that I loved, it kind of flipped the way that I look at life, and it helped make me into the writer that I am today. So in all 6 of my novels, what I've noticed that I've done, and what's so great is that all of us would do it different, but what I've noticed that I've done is put my characters in, as I said before, a hopeless situation, at a crossroads in life where they can no longer go forward in the way that they've been going. And they have to make a decision. They cannot do things the way they've been doing them, think things the way they've been thinking them. They can't live the way they've been living or act the way they've been acting. And we've all been there. Well, y'all are really young, so not all of us. Most of us have been there, where there comes a point where you can't do things the way you've always done them. And that's what I've done to all of my characters, who have been anywhere from 12 years old to 97 years old. I don't try and pinpoint a certain character or a certain way that it has to be done. I try to look at all different angles and put them in those situations. But I really do want to talk about what y'all want to talk about. So what I'm going to do is do a very, very quick reading. Not only am I a writer, but I'm a reader, and I often go to these readings and writings, and there's something about reading that can put us to sleep. I think it's because when we were children, we had stories read to us before bed. And I do not want to put y'all to sleep, so I'm going to do a very, very quick reading, and then I want y'all to ask me some questions, and we'll have some dialogue about writing. This is from a book that actually won't come out until 2011. It is called The Life She Wrote. And I have a quote at the front of the novel that says, from Madeleine L'Engle, who is one of my favorite writers and has written one of my favorite books on writing, which is called Walking on Water. And she says this in that book: we as human beings tend to have the terrible gift of free will, this ability to make choices and to help write our own story. Madeleine L'Engle. Okay, this is from the book called The Life She Wrote. This is the prologue. 70-year-old Lillian Caulfield Eddington didn't write this part, this dying part. She wouldn't have, of course. She'd have written a completely different ending. After almost a lifetime of writing her life, writing herself into life, she thought she'd figured out all the rules. What fell under free will, what words had the most power, what hurt herself or others. She was wrong. Now she knows she was wrong. A fog-infused light slips into the room, soft and whispered, fading the edges of a room she wrote herself into years ago. If she'd known, really known, that this would be the last room, would she have written it the same way? Yes, she thinks. She's not the kind of woman who doubts her decisions. She thinks all of this in less time than it takes to read it. Her last thoughts are of her husband Redmond and her daughter Jenny, of how she didn't write this ending where she is alone, and he still doesn't love her. There is the instant where pain rips across her left breast, and then her breath settles into her chest, gathers her soul into the palm of its hands. Love me. A cry buried the deepest, hidden the longest, and known forever. Her last unheard cry, love me. So what do y'all want to talk about? Yes, ma'am.
Do you write any nonfiction?
Do I write nonfiction? I blog. Does that count? I have not written any nonfiction. There is a nonfiction book I've toyed with on and off for the past 12 years that maybe someday I'll allow see the light of day. In between every novel that I write, I started this habit of writing down what I call life lessons learned from writing, which are, it's actually one of my favorite talks to give, which is that sometimes the lessons we learn about writing are as well as life lessons. For example, one of the first things you learn in writing is that a character has to really, really want something. For the story to be worth something, the character has to want something, right? I mean, if they don't want something, what do we care what they do next? They have to want to, get out of a situation, fix a situation, get somebody, love somebody, find a cure, whatever it might be. And I compare that to life, and that our life is even better when we know what we want and we're passionate about something. So that kind of thing.
And where can we sign up to take your class?
I think this is about it.
This is it?
Yeah, I think this is it. You can read my, I don't teach. It'd be fun though.
I'm having a hard time finding non-credit type of things out there for creative writing.
Oh, well, we were just talking about this in Atlanta. There are some wonderful, the Margaret Mitchell House, the Decatur Center for the Book, Agnes Wright.
We're talking downtown Atlanta, right? I'm
Yeah.
the area. I'm talking like Fayetteville or local town.
No.
Places.
There's book festivals and such as that, and if you start to really search online, there's some wonderful opportunities. Agnes Scott now has something called Agnes Wright. You all have amazing things here. The Margaret Mitchell House does things. The Decatur Center for the Book has they have an amazing program. People coming in and speaking all the time. Yeah.
Well, it's so funny that I really want to write. I sit in front of the computer all day long, and I type 100 words a minute.
Oh, good Lord.
But I don't have my thoughts going in that direction. And I took a class one time. It was just so helpful to take a creative writing class.
Absolutely.
It changed my whole thinking about a sentence.
Absolutely.
Because I was putting no feeling into it.
No, you had. That's
Zero
where.
feeling,
Yeah.
and the teacher's going like, so how do you
Well, the first thing I ever published was called Closed Head Injury in Children. That didn't have a lot of feeling in it. It was for my master's degree. So I saw him back here. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
What's the pay for in your case? I heard a lot of cases, writing career, writing field is not paid very well.
You're asking me about money.
I know you don't mind if you took a pay cut from nursing to writing.
Girlfriend, it's not about, it's not the money-making profession. Now, it can be. Look at Stephen King. Look at Daniel Steele. It absolutely can be. What it is it's a life that's rich, and I don't mean this in a cheesy, self-explanatory way. It's a life that's rich in so many other things that eventually, and sometimes, yes, you do hit the jackpot. There's the great story about the movie deal, or, by the time you write, I've written 6 novels and they're in 4 or 5 languages. By the time you do that, yes, you can definitely make a living. I'm not buying a beach house with it, but you can definitely make a living. So, but there's so many things you can do with it. There's magazines and there's teaching and there's, there's so many other outlets that when you make writing your life that you can find ways to get paid for editorially, working for publishing houses. It's an entire world that you can find jobs in, whether it's PR for books or while you're writing on the side, or I know a lot of the PR people I've worked with, which is publicity, they're writing on the side. I just found out my publicist in New York just published this beautiful book of poems, but she's working in the publishing world so that she can keep her feet in there while she's writing. So, there is the great story of the person who wrote their first novel and hit, there's Gone with the Wind and To Kill a Mockingbird and there's A Secret Life of Bees, but those are rare and few and far between. I never want to add up how much I've made per page. I would be just mortified. It would just be awful. I never want to put it into an hourly wage, but the things it's rich in otherwise are beyond measure to me. So, yes.
When you write at home, do you find writing by hand is more productive as far as idea-wise than, say, writing typing?
That is my favorite question. You get a star today. I love writing by hand. Love it, love it. I do it every single day. And I think it's important. I really do. I would never tell somebody that they have to write a certain way because I don't believe that. I don't believe that there's one way to do writing at all. But for me, and I think for a lot of people, they will find they can tap into things better writing by hand. Now, my first novel, I wrote completely by hand. I don't do that anymore. It's a time issue. It's a experience issue. But I do write. I journal or write by hand every day. And every time I'm starting a book, I write it by hand. Every single time. That prologue I just read, I wrote by hand on a back porch. It really helps me. I'm not telling you this is the only way to do it, but it really helps me tap into, there's something kinesthetic about it that helps you tap into what you're really trying to say. Now, there comes a practical standpoint where you got to put your finger on the keyboard and write the book and edit the book. But yes, I do believe that writing by hand is incredibly helpful. So, yes, I'll get right back to you. Hold on.
When you start to write a book, like what is your process like to get started?
I pull out my hair, I pace the house, I yell at the kids. You know, that's a great question that I wish I had. Once again, it's one of those questions I wish I had a textbook answer for so I could help you. But all 7 books I've written, and I've written a couple short stories, and I just finished a novella, which was really fun. I have a Christmas novella coming out in October. Every single one of those has started in a different way. So there's not one way for me, but if I had to pin it down, I would say what I said at the beginning of the lecture, or did I just lecture? Oh my gosh. At the beginning of the talk, at the beginning of the discussion, which is that I try to find a situation that looks hopeless, and I ask what if, or what would happen next. And sometimes it changes through as I start to write by hand and explore the idea, it will change. But it always starts with an image to me. An image of a woman, like I just read, who thought she wrote her whole life. I mean, wrote how she wanted her. This is a woman who wrote how she wanted her life to go. And she's on her deathbed. And that image came to me, and then the story followed. So that's sort of how I do it. There's 10,000 ways to do it, but that's how I do it. Oh, go ahead.
You were introduced as being a minister's daughter,
Yes.
preacher's kid. How much spiritual or Christian do you allow in your books, and does Penguin pressure you to keep it out of your books?
Oh, wow. Penguin does not pressure me to keep it out of my books or in my books, either one, because I don't write Christian fiction. Like I don't write, they call it inspirational in the publishing world. Christian fiction is inspirational. I'd like to believe that everything we believe and everything that's in us comes out in our writing and is evident in our writing, but it's definitely not overt, is probably the best way to say it. But of course it influences my writing, of course. How could it not? So, yes, Ron.
When you got your book published, how many, because like I've heard of writers that say it took them years to get their stuff published. Like, did you send it in and they just liked it right off the bat, or did you, like, how long did it take you to get like your first novel published?
Somewhere in between. I didn't go through the 12 years of angst, but it didn't happen in a week either. There's this great quote by C.S. Lewis, and I wish I could think of it verbatim right now, and I can't, but it's called the bottom line is first things first. And that's the way I sort of handled it, is that I finished a novel before I ever even tried to get into the publishing world. And I think sometimes a lot of the angst-ridden forever stories that you hear about are people who are trying to get published after they've written 2 chapters and start throwing their work out there to get positive feedback. And I wrote and most people don't want to hear this, but I wrote for 4 years before I ever showed a word of it to anybody. I finished a complete novel and started another one before I even started on the agent-publisher search. And after I started that search, it was less than a year before I found an agent and I actually sold the second book I wrote. My first book I wrote didn't come out till my 4th novel. That made sense, right? The first book I wrote was the 4th novel I published. So the second book I wrote was the first novel that came out. But, and that sounds really short, a year or less, but there were 4 years before that where I was working, taking classes, writing every day, trying to finish a novel, going to conferences, all that kind of, the hard work. The first things first kind of work. So that's how it worked for me. Oh, wait, let me ask her since she didn't go in.
I noticed that you said that your characters in your book, you always put them in a situation where they have to change, or something's going to happen for you to see outcome. do you find it best to stick to an idea, or in your case, how your characters always have this idea about them? When you're writing as an author, do you stick to one thing for all of your writings, or can you switch it up? Which is easier to do?
I definitely switch it up. I always wish I was the kind of writer who outlined and had a very planned way of the writers doing things. Unfortunately, I don't live that way, and I don't write that way. So I don't know what's going to happen next. It's why I write, to find out what's going to happen next. If I outline the book, I'm never going to write it because I already know what happens next. Now, I'm not telling you not to outline, because some of my favorite writers do the most intense outlines. It gives me a headache. I mean, I have one friend who has color-coded note cards for every character, and that is a beautiful way to write if you can do that. But that's just not the way I write. You can line, 200 of us up here, and we're all going to have a different process. Every single one of us is going to write differently. But no, I don't ever do it the same way. If I did, why would you read my second book? I already told you in my first book. So, no, they're different every time. So, yes.
When you said that you start writing, you like to write by hand. Mm-hmm. Do you have advice that goes along with that? Like, most writers, like some of them were depressives, and so they drank a lot. Some of them smoked weed. So I mean, various things.
Oh, all of those. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I forgot that was on tape. I don't do any of those. I light a candle. I love that myth, though. It's a great myth that we're all really, have a lot of addictions and obsessions. I think a lot of us do have obsessions, but I'm not sure about addictions. I think part of writing is obsessive, for sure. I mean, who spends 2 years on one thing, except raising children? I mean, there's 2 years on one piece of work that might never be read. You have to be vaguely obsessive to do that. But I don't know. I don't really, my vice is writing. I get antsy and weird and in a really bad mood if I'm not writing. And because of the habits I built up when I have 3 kids who are 17, 15, and 11. And so when I first started writing, I started a habit of writing very, very early in the morning. And I still have that habit. It's very hard for me to creatively write after noon, anytime after lunchtime. I work after that time, but I don't. My creative writing is usually done by noon. So no, I'd like to be really cool and have this cool vice, but not so much. So yes, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask, do you ever find it hard to sit down and write? Like you do things that keep you from...
Like alphabetize the spices?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
What do you do to get past that?
Oh, gosh. That's a hard question and an easy question. I make myself sit down is the easy answer. The hard part is sometimes that just doesn't work. I mean, sometimes you do have to take a walk and alphabetize the spices and clean out the closet. I mean, sometimes you just do. I believe in what I kind of call sacred idle time. I believe in the discipline of writing, even though I don't like the word discipline. I'd rather call it a commitment to writing than a discipline to it. But there are times when it's just not working and you have to walk away. It's like a bad relationship sometimes. The more you guys talk about it, the worse the relationship gets, right? You keep talking and talking and you're talking in circles and nothing gets solved and you just got to walk away a little while. But when I walk away from it like that, I do try and do something very creative. I was kidding about the spices. I would never alphabetize my spices, ever, under any circumstance. But, I do go for long walks or go to an antique store or go to an art museum or something like that when I have to walk away from it. I firmly believe in alone, long walks. in nature. That's something that works for me. That might not work for somebody else. For you, it might be working out or whatever it might be, or reading. But you know what I mean? Everybody's different. Everybody's different. So, but yeah, and then sometimes you just have to, the times that I have the most trouble making myself sit down when I don't want to is when it's time to edit. I don't have that much trouble sitting down to tell the story. When it's time to edit, I literally have to bribe myself and say, if you do 1.5 hours of editing, you can have tiramisu. I don't care, a glass of red wine, whatever it might be. I will literally bribe myself. I don't have that much trouble when I'm in the creative process. And if I get stuck, I try to take a walk or something like that. So, like I said, I'm obsessive about it. So, yeah, sorry.
What sort of influence have your children had on your writing? Like, have they been inspiration for your characters, or have they changed the way that you've written completely in some of your novels?
They have never really changed the way I've written. Because they were babies when I started writing, you know, my writing has evolved more out of the way I would say something than who they are. But of course I've used them. I have 2 wild little boys, and I have definitely, I had a couple conversations I put in Between the Tides, one of my novels, that they said, my one son looked at my other and said, did you know turtles can breathe out of their butts? And my other son said, oh, that's why your face looks like a butt, turtles. I mean, it just, you know, that kind of thing I do use. But there's another great Madeleine L'Engle quote. She talks about, she was a writer and her husband was an actor, and somebody asked her how they decide what parts to take or what books to write. And she always asked, would I let the children see it or read it? And I do ask myself that. Now, that's not how everybody should write by any means, because we wouldn't have some of the beautiful literature we do if somebody thought, well, can I let the children read it? We'd miss out on Catcher in the Rye. But, you know, I right now ask myself that in certain ways. But no, I don't write for them. I don't write about them. And of course, they're in the back of my mind because they're my heart. But I don't think they change that much about how I write. So, yeah.
Are you the kind of writer, like when you write, you say, oh, that's horrible, so you go back and write it, you're like, oh, that's horrible, so you go back and write it again? Or do you kind of like get through the book and then go back and redo it? Or you write like chapter by chapter and go?
I bet you could answer that just from my talk. I definitely don't go back and fix. I write from the beginning to the end. I try to find out what happens, and then I fix it. So, I've heard it described by 2 people in the exact same way. Stephen King described it this way, and so does Anne Lamott. And both of them describe it as writing with the door shut and the door open. It's 2 separate processes. My first draft I write with the door completely shut. I don't worry about who's going to read it, what somebody's going to say, what they think of it, how it sounds. I'm writing it for the way it sounds to me. I'm really into the way the words sound when they're put together, and the way the story, what's happening next. And then I go back and fix it. And then I open the door, metaphorically, obviously, but yes, sir. Am I confusing you?
I know you're a reader, and I don't know why I'm asking this question to you, because you love to read, and I hate to read. And I've asked this question like maybe 100 times to 100 different people. I get the same answer, but I guess I'm searching for something different. Okay, do you think that I know it would benefit me, but do you think it's necessary for me to be a reader if I want to become a writer? I think I've been writing before I could read, honestly. I do not like to read.
Oh, I want to say yes, but I don't want you to not write. So I think you should write no matter what, period.
It's not necessary.
No, it's not necessary. I think it enriches it, absolutely. But of course not. You're probably a beautiful writer. I would never tell anybody not to write because they don't do it the way I think they should do it, ever. Never. Except my kids. I tell them never.
Thank you for saying that.
You're more than welcome. Do I get popular teacher now? Did I miss anybody before you get, okay, go ahead.
So you got your degree in nursing.
Yes.
How does that affect your writing?
Oh, it's so funny. Dr. Bird and I were talking about this in the hallway, that I don't wish I hadn't done it by any means. I think all our life experiences feed into our work. I definitely learned how to technically write better by going to graduate school because I had to publish my thesis. So the skills that I learned there, of course, translate into now. One of the things that I think, I was a pediatric nurse, I worked with kids. One of the things I think that enriched my writing the most about being a nurse or having a nursing career is the psychological aspect of people and how they handle a crisis and trauma and who they are when something happens to them. When you're in the trenches like that, you see it a lot differently than I compare it sort of to being a bartender, I think. You really get to see the real human emotions, and I became very interested in that through my nursing career. So that's how I think it enriched it. Yes, darling?
Would you ever consider, I mean, I know you write for almost some adults.
Yeah.
Like poetry or adolescent literature, just to try new things? Or?
Absolutely. And I've thought about it, and I've started 2 of them and haven't finished them. Not because I don't find them interesting, but because I've signed contracts to write the other novels. But I have started 2 of them, and one of them is about a 12-year-old in 1940s Atlanta. And then my son is a baseball player. And I've started a couple times a novel about Little League baseball that I have to wait until I don't see these parents anymore. But yes, I've done. I mean, I think it would be an amazing. That is something I would like to try next. And just like trying the novella this year, that's the first time I've ever done that. And there's something creatively inspiring about trying different things and not sticking with one thing the whole time. So yes, I would think about it. I just haven't done it yet. So, yes.
Logistics, again, have you ever tried dictating into a recorder?
Never.
Never. So that's,
and I think it's a great thing to do. I have friends who do it.
not your style.
It's about the written word for me.
You're a great lecturer, though.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, so you could.
Now I'm all self-conscious. I don't know, there's something beautiful to me about the written word, and I see it on the page, the way the words fit together, almost, this is going to sound a little crazy, but almost like a puzzle. Like I see the words on the page like a puzzle. Do they fit together right? Do they rub up against each other correctly? Do they look good? Do they sound good? And to me, speaking, my daddy's a preacher. He doesn't write and I don't preach. I mean, there's just something very different about the art. And so no, I've never tried dictating. But I know people who do, and I know it works very well for them.
And I'm glad you said about the pen, too.
Yeah. The kinesthetic, yes.
Kinesthetic of that.
That's a nursing word.
Because
Yeah.
I could visualize that slowing my thoughts down.
Yes, it does. It slows your thoughts down and helps you find the right way to say
The
it.
typist that I am, so it would slow me down.
And it connects you to you. So I saw a hand over here. Ready? No? Okay, yes.
I was wondering, so which degree would you say that you experiment with your characters, like what the person would look like, how the person would act inside and out?
How I experiment with them? Oh, the word I would use wouldn't be experiment. It would be get to know. I don't go into it with preconceived notions of who they are. I don't say this is going to be a character with blonde hair and blue eyes who really loves roses and lives in a white picket house with a guy with brown hair and brown eyes. I don't go in that set. I know what her dilemma is. I know where she is emotionally, and I very much compare it to getting to know someone in real life. So what do? How do you get to know someone? You go out to lunch with them. You go to a party with them. You hang out with them at school. You sit and talk with them in the hall. You put them in a situation and see how they act. You put them in a car with an idiot and see what happens to them. That's how you get to know people. What would he do now? What's he going to do? And those scenes don't always end up in the novel, but that's how I get to know them. The same way you get to know somebody in real life. How would they react? What do they look like? What do they do with their mouth, their eyes, their ears? Do they touch their hair? Do they do this weird nervous thing with their hands like I do? What do they do? So that's how I get to know them. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Similar, or not similar, but piggybacking off her, do you put some of yourself in each character that you write? Or do you, not intentionally do it, but do you, when you go back and look, do you see that there's some part of you in each character?
If I see anything of myself, I try to take it out. So, but I have to say this, you know, I used to get very defensive about that when I first started writing because none of my characters are based on anything that's ever happened to me. But guess what? They come from me. What are you going to do? That what we write comes from us. And the more it's of us, the better it is. So I would never do that particular action, and that particular circumstance never happened to me. But the words and the feelings came from me somehow. Only I wrote it. But no, none of my characters have been based on who I am. And when I've seen an idiosyncrasy or something in a character that would have been the way I said it or the way I did it, I try to take that out because that means I wasn't as much into them. Now, the people who know me really, really well, they say they can't help but read and see me, but that's just because they know me and they're putting me into the book because they're with me every day. But I try very, very hard to not have it be about me, to be from me but not about me. How's that? So, yes.
I guess, okay, who's your biggest influence?
Oh, wow.
Or like, who did you read most, like, I guess in your culture?
Some of my favorite authors. Oh, I'm so sad J.D. Salinger died. That's really sad. So I have to mention him. You know, growing up, it's such a hard question because it varies so much and it's so widespread. But definitely growing up, C.S. Lewis was one of my favorite writers. Allegories to me are some of my favorite kinds of writing, and he's a very allegorical, did I say that right? Writer. And I love almost anybody who can do that. In college, my favorite writer, it's going to stun you, but was Stephen King. I think I read everything he wrote in college because he is I didn't like all the stories, but he is a master storyteller. Master storyteller. And then, of course, I love all the classics. My favorites are, my favorite book of almost all time is Beach Music by Pat Conroy. I mean, he could not have, hardly anybody could have influenced my work more than him, not in the style that I write, but in, once again, that storytelling that grabs you by the throat and doesn't let you go. That's Pat Conroy. He'll open you with a scene that there's no way you don't want to know what happens next. No way. Anne Rivers Siddons is one of my favorites. She's a Southern Auburn girl, so I have to mention her. You know, and I won't throw all the classics at you. You have to read them so you understand how important they are to read and how they influence your writing and story structure. But I'll leave that up to your teachers. Yeah.
Say you're in a position where it requires you to hire a writer. What would be one of the first qualities you look for in a writer?
That is such a great question, and I wish I was at my computer so I could think about it, but I'm standing at a podium. What is the first quality I would want in a writer? No, what am I hiring them to write? My biography, a novel, fiction? What am I hiring them to write?
Right. There's no...
Not technical writing. Not like an article about closed head injury in children.
No, everything.
Okay.
Just right now.
Can I say two things? I would say experience along with an ability to tap into their inner way of saying things. I'm not finding the right words for that right now, but a person who is able to say things only the way they would say them, able to tap into the perfect way that they would express themselves. So that takes a little bit of experience to find that voice in yourself. So maybe someone whose experience has led them to discover their own voice in a really good way. That would be the first thing I would look for. Absolutely. In a clear way. Yeah. Yes.
My husband's a retired Army chaplain, passed now.
Lucky you.
33 years, we'll be married in February. I'm turning 60 in May.
Oh, wow.
And in 1997, when we started a church after we got out of the military, there was a Christian singer called Michael Card, and his chorus was like this: so many books, so little time, so many hungered, so many blind, striving for words they must wait in the night to open a Bible and move towards the light. Michael Card had just come back from China, and they were begging for Bibles. Do you ever feel that your novels are relevant? That there's so little time. I have about 20 years left, and I have to really pick and choose. I'm a college professor too, so I write curriculum. But
oh wow, do I feel like my novels are relevant? I can honestly say that I would never answer that question. I would leave that up to the people who read them. What might be, you're making me want to cry. What would make it relevant? What she might think is relevant might not be what you think is relevant. So what would affect his life definitely wouldn't affect yours. I think that, I mean, there's certain hard issues that affect all of us, and of course the Bible's one of them. Not as relevant as the Bible, that's for sure, but there's, you know, relevancy can be very, very individual. And I think that you have to trust the people who have either read someone's work or work that it's compared to. You know, that's one of the reasons we have these blurbs on the front of our books, is that you can see, oh, if so-and-so likes it, it's probably just like this or similar to that. So what would be relevant to her might not be relevant to me. And I don't mean relevant as important, I mean relevant to our lives at that time. And for me, if reading is anything, it's about how it touches you and how that story affects you. And I don't ever expect everybody in this room or any room to love my work or my writing. You know, it's that old adage, you can't please everybody all of the time. I don't write for, it'd be impossible to write for everybody or to be relevant to everybody. I would like to think my books are touching and that people search their inner lives after reading them. I like to think that, not that it changes their life, but maybe changes the way they think about something, even if it's one thing. So that's my answer.
well, ours is experiential because we've been stationed in West Berlin behind the Iron Curtain in 1977 and 1980 when Afghanistan was invading on the east and the Iranian hostage situation was going on the west.
Right.
To me, those are vital world issues at the time, and they are today. Terrorism, et cetera, et cetera. And they even go to the point that's saying that there's a military class in our society now. You know, it usually runs in families, or the patriotism, whatever you want to call it, that people are really living their lives in the trenches.
Right.
And we come back, and the same thing, my parents were missionaries. They come back to the United States, and there's no calling. It's what's for lunch, and what am I going to do for the weekend?
Right.
And we really, you called it an idol. The headlines are about the sports culture and how that becomes an idol. I just see people wasting their time, to me. Well, I don't know, I'm sorry, but we've just always been on the edge.
Right. Well, you should write about that then. You should write about that. I haven't lived there. That's not what I write about. But you should. You're very moved by it. And it's something that is internally moving to you. You should try and express that. Okay. Okay. But I didn't live there. I lived in Philadelphia. So, you know, there's...
I'm writing a book called Life Lessons in Home, Church, and School. You're freaky. Where did you live in Philadelphia?
I am freaky. I lived in Narberth, Ardmore area.
Yes,
so.
we lived in.
But anything that touches you and really moves you should be something you try to express with words, without worrying about whether it's relevant for the world scene at the moment. If it touches you, it touches somebody else. Trust me. If it touches you, it touches somebody else. If you're feeling it, so is another human being. So that's how I feel about that. Last question. Yeah.
Yeah, last question.
All right. Well, you do say you write books and such, but do you ever submit work to magazines, and which ones are your favorite ones to read and which ones do you submit to? Myself, I'm a freelancer. So
right.
It's pretty relevant.
It is very, and magazines are short stories and essays, and magazines are an absolutely beautiful way to start honing your voice and submitting stories and getting feedback. I never did it and still don't, solely and only because of time. I would love to move into that as the years change. My oldest is about to go off to college, which I can barely think about, but That is a beautiful, it's one of my, and I love reading all the short stories. Of course, the Atlantic Monthly Paste is a local one. It's great. There's some, Reader's Digest, all of them. Go to the library if you can't subscribe to them. Sit down and read these short stories. They're amazing, and many authors get started. And some of my favorite authors, I think you had George Singleton come talk here once, and he's published I can't even count, hundreds of magazine pieces before he was, so yeah, absolutely. It's a great way. All right, thank you for having me.